Absolute, it's just too hard to define.
Okay, and Polly would like to comment on that briefly.
This is actually a slight misunderstanding. It's not about zero emissions. If you take it that the excess of greenhouse gas emissions are the pollution, it's the excess, the imbalance that creates pollution. If I go back to the idea of noise pollution, sound is not pollution if it's pleasant on your ears, but if it gets too loud, it becomes a pollution. So it's the same with greenhouse gases. At a certain level, it's fine. It's the excess that can be deemed a pollution. So it's getting it to a level that it's fine. So it's not zero emissions. It's about getting it to the correct level where we have balance. That is, of course, absolutely possible.
That's great.
It's just a matter of how fast we work.
That's good and clear. Thank you, Polly. And last brief comment from Tom.
Yeah, I would agree with Polly. Ultimately, the Earth can absorb so much, and we need to make sure that what we emit is below that amount.
Thank you. So if there's any more questions, there will be a full question-answer session at the end. So I'd like to bring your questions up then. The next part of our question today is, what is the role of government in reducing carbon emissions satisfactorily? I'd like to begin with Alan on my far left.
Okay, I think the first one is keep your hands firmly on the tiller through the recession. I imagine if you're a politician, the recession must be pretty scary, and to have to then enter Copenhagen with really ambitious carbon reductions is, it's very easy for us to criticise politicians, but it's a very tough thing to ask them to do. So, we should use whatever we can to actually really encourage them to try and manage the two as one problem and not two separate problems. Because if we keep the two as separate problems, the recession will win. Yeah. I think another thing they can do related to it with the New Deal, rejuvenating the economy, make sure a lot of that money goes into green jobs. People are talking about that, but I'm seeing the rhetoric, hearing the rhetoric, but I'm not seeing it in reality. So I think there's a lot of opportunity where the recession and all those billions of pounds which are being found in Treasury could actually really help generate a low carbon economy. And I think the third thing is just to help improve the quality of the debate. I mean, we will have a good quality debate here because we're all more or less on the same side. I was watching TV a few days ago where some people on the Isle of Wight were complaining that the windmill farm, which they're planning for the Isle of Wight, is just too polluting and it will spoil the economy. And it was a really shallow debate because the biggest industrial process in the Isle of Wight is windmill blades. But, there's still these people who are dug in that even windmills are too ugly. And I'd love to see Gordon Brown and say, yeah, they are ugly, but so are power stations, we've got to live with it. So raise the quality of the debate.
Thank you. Tom?
I think the most important thing that government can do is create an economic marketplace in which it pays to be green. For consumers, it would be then cheaper to be green. And for businesses, they would be more successful and ultimately more profitable if they were green. And as long as we've got this kind of difference with, the government saying, be green, but yet there's an economic system in place which basically incentivizes people to do the opposite, then as long as we've got that, we have a big problem and we need to deal with that.
Right. Polly?
We seem to have come to a logjam with governments. We're getting movement in America now, we have a new government there, but on the whole, I see pretty internationally, logjam is what's happening. I see it in Europe, I see it even in the United Nations. There's a kind of sticking point that's happened here. We're not really kind of getting the breakthrough. We're not really getting the sense of we've got a huge global emergency on our hands and we need to move very, very fast with very big, very bold decisions. Barack Obama is making steps, definitely, but 90 million into renewable energy is, quite frankly, a drop in the ocean. The EU is talking about the Med solar plan, 20 gigawatts renewable energy, mainly from concentrating solar power plants from the Sahara Desert by 2020. That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. In reality, the scale of the problem, if I can give you an example, is I understand concentrating solar power very well. If we were by 2050 to generate half the world's electricity, just half, with concentrating solar power, we would be looking at 50,000 gigawatts worth of concentrating solar power plants. Now, given that your average power plant is 1 gigawatt, that's 50,000 plants. That works out 1 gigawatt plant every single day, Saturday and Sunday off, because we need weekends off, for 30 years. And if it's not concentrating solar power which can do it, then what on earth is going to fill that gap? And that shows us the scale of this problem, the magnitude of this problem. We really have to actually ensure that we now get huge, bold action, massive decision making. We're not getting that yet.
And what can government do towards that?
There needs to be, it's about action. But the action, I actually think, is in part the pressure that's put on governments. The demand, the call, the being told, the asking, being told, we want that now. There's a terrible, incredible cautiousness that happens here. A cautiousness not to speak out against big business, big corporations, a decision that it may well be, a difficult decision to make here. We don't want to be stepping out of business as usual. I do think actually people power is hugely important in all of this. We are going to have to put a lot of pressure. We're going to have to collectively call upon our governments and ask them, demand upon them to act.
Okay, thank you. Matt.
Well, I'd say rather obviously that the role of government is to govern, and by that I really mean that it's not got such a leadership role as an enabling role. And this leads on quite nicely from what Polly was saying there, really, which is that it's the collective pressure and desires of the voting public that will lead the government to make particular choices. But what's been happening in recent years, and I'll give you an example from a group of master's students at UCL that I teach every year. I asked them precisely the same question as this panel's asking, who's more responsible, government, as in the state, the citizen, or business? And over recent years, they've swayed more and more towards the state. In other words, it's kind of a replacement God for them. Whatever the state says, they'll do it because they understand that the state's going to be right about this. And that's really the wrong way to approach this problem. The government can't do anything unless they have a mandate. So the mandate really can only come from the people, the ultimate end users of the services they provide.
And if they had the mandate from the public, what steps can you think of that they could take?
Problem is, government never have the mandate because we have a 5-year cycle. Clearly, they can take a leadership role. There are all sorts of soft and hard policy measures that can be explored. The difficulty they have is that they look at the swing voters to understand what issues motivate them, and they focus their policy mechanisms on that. So ultimately, understanding politics is really at the heart of cracking this problem for me, but it has to be motivated from the grassroots.
Thank you. The first 2 or 3 questions or comments from the audience. Yes, the lady there in the white.
It's about ugliness and wind power. Can you hear?
No.
It's about ugliness and wind power. For about 150 years, we've had ugly metal structures going right across our land. I've not heard anybody complain about those, and they're called pylons.
Pylons.
So that's a very good point. For 150 years we've had ugly metal pylons across our landscapes. Nobody's complained. What's the difference between that and windmills? Any questions on the issue of what is the role of government? Gentleman at the back.
Thanks. Yeah, I always see parallels with the smoking debate in that a lot of the sort of scientific evidence was denied or distorted for many years.